Hi, and welcome to our security operations panel discussion, security validation and the path to exposure management. My name is Brian Moran, and I lead product marketing here at Simulate. Today I'm very fortunate to have two security operations veterans joining me for this discussion and webinar. So with that, I'm very happy to introduce Marcus Flasher, Senior Security Manager at Raiffeisen Bank International, based in Austria with operations throughout Central and Eastern Europe. Marcus, very happy to have you. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you for having me as well. So I've been with RBI and basically also the security sector, or specifically in the financial industry, for a couple of years now in various different roles. So I started out with more of a focus on introducing cloud security services at RBI, specifically things like Office 365, CASB solutions, a zero trust solution, and also obviously things like going into AWS and Azure. Then I moved on to more of a supporting role, let's say, when it comes to our security in agile journey. So for our DevOps colleagues, which then focused more on security architecture, threat modeling, and risk awareness, as well as mitigation. And right now I'm more in a security analyst role as part of our group central security operations center, where we are also using Simulate quite heavily, which is one of the tools that I'm responsible for here as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Marcus. We also have another security operations veteran, Rafael Ferreira. He's worked with both global banks and regional banks in South America. Rafael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Brian. So I'm Rafael. I worked with cybersecurity with the last 10 years. I worked for KPMG as a pen tester and auditor on Bungie, the food company, as a cybersecurity analyst for BNP Paribas. And more recently, as a cybersecurity manager for Banco Pan. I resigned last week. So I worked for them, taking care of the vulnerability management process, TPRM, third-party risk management, and the cybersecurity risks in general.
All right, thank you. You both have some really interesting backgrounds, and I think you'll have a lot to add here to the discussion. I'll click out of the slide so we can kind of focus in on who we are. So I'll start off with the questions. Question one would be for both of you. It would be, what is the biggest change you've seen in SecOps over the last 5, maybe 10 years? So Marcus, would you like to start?
Sure. I think in general, for me, it has been on one or on two layers, I would say. On one, it was a kind of organizational shift, or person-to-person shift, maybe even. But on the other hand, also, obviously, technology has evolved quite a lot over the last 5 to 10 years. But the first layer, I think, was actually that we had to evolve to move to a more proactive approach and not play gatekeepers anymore within cybersecurity, actually become more enablers for, especially in RBI, for our bank internal products as well, to actually support and consult them to make them aware of the risks they are facing and how to mitigate those risks. And I think this also built up both from an external and from an internal pressure, because obviously we have news outlets that basically bombard you day by day with news about the latest cyber attacks that happen across the globe, which obviously also builds up internal pressure amongst all the various stakeholders that you have as a security division, who will then expect of you to not just sit there and react when something happens, but to also obviously consult and give insight and advice in terms of how to actually stay ahead of the curve. And from the technology perspective, it is obviously very strongly related to all the kind of cloud services that came up, whether that's AWS, Azure, but then also the tools, the security tools surrounding that, and all the automation that comes with it, and that will continue to grow with large language models, AI, however that topic develops in the future. So I think, yeah, we are kind of on the future edge here right now, across the entire industry.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like that aspect of, you can't be the department of no, right? You have to be enabling the business while the threats are still there. You mentioned that pressure. That pressure is daily, and that approach is just to be proactive and stay ahead. Rafael, from you, what changes have you seen in the last 5-10 years?
Okay. I totally agree with Marcus and the automation and the use of AI. I think mainly the automation of manual tasks and the use of the AI to improve the efficiency of the analysis, because it enables faster threat detection and response, and the result is the reduction of manual tasks. So Marcus gave us the more complete answer.
No, that's great. Of course, you have to talk about AI. It's mandatory this year. You mentioned AI, and but it's also important to notice like what's the application of that, right? And that automation that both of you talked about is both for the threat detection and response, but also other forms of automation. And again, I think sometimes it's better just to focus in on that automation and not get caught up in the buzzword of AI, but the outcome is what we're automating. So much what we're able to do now through automation would had to be manual before, right? From your pen testing experiences and such. So if we move on to look at the, automation probably has a role. Maybe that's the transition here. Would be as the security teams have adopted this proactive approach to security, why have they moved from a proactive to reactive, and what are those benefits? So Rafael, why don't you start, please?
Okay. So Brian, for me, SecOps teams have shifted to a proactive approach, and mainly to prevent threats before they occur. So it minimizes the risks and reduce the response times. So for me, this approach helps us to identify vulnerabilities early and improves overall security posture. So it reduces the impact of potential breaches. So for me, it's the main reason.
Makes sense. And Marcus, what's been your view of why have we moved toward this proactive security, and maybe what steps have you seen? What benefits have you seen with the proactive security?
Yeah, I mean, one thing is definitely the staying ahead of the threat curve, because you have to be aware of what is out there nowadays, at least on a macro scale. Otherwise, you're not able to respond if it actually happens to you. But I think it is also, when we're talking about automation, I think a lot of it is also efficiency and streamlining your internal processes. And when we're talking about automation, for example, something that we did this year is more or less automated, or layer 1 at our SOC. So this is fully automated, where basically, because what we do here is that most of the, let's say, enrichment that we get out of our security cases and the security tickets, events that we now create, are actually being enriched by automation, so that then our L2 layer is actually starting to be human, and then L3 obviously as well, to kind of be way more efficient here in terms of actually handling the hundreds of security events we get per day. So I think that is also one of the very big benefits, and something that needs to be chased, because obviously with AI and automation not just being used by us in a defensive position, it is also being used in an offensive position by attackers. So everything grows faster, everything happens faster. So you also need to be way more precise with where you want to focus your attention and your effort and your time.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
That's also very important in terms of being proactive. You have to be very selective where you want to be proactive and to what degree as well.
Right. And just as the attackers are applying AI and automation for their own efficiency and faster evolution, that also is an opportunity for internally as well, right? For what kind of automation can you apply for security validation and more frequent testing? Rafael, do you want to talk about maybe your approach to security and proactive through automated security validation?
Okay. I think it helps to identify vulnerabilities and gaps on security software that we use in our companies before the attackers do, before they identify these vulnerabilities or gaps in our security defenses. So improving threat detection will strengthening our defenses. So it helps teams to understand the real world attack scenarios, enhancing the ability of responding quickly to potential threats. So for me, it's the main reason that pushed up this change.
Right. And that adoption of automation allows for that testing to be, much more frequent, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we can test our defenses not biannual or not every semester, but monthly or weekly or daily if needed.
Yeah, that's awesome. Marcus, for you, what's been the experience and benefits of moving to that automation, that automated security validation for your infrastructure and your controls?
I think one point is, again, efficiency, because you can't really test your security as a whole, whether that's your endpoint security, your security hardening of various operating systems, or even your security detection in a manual way nowadays. I mean, you can do it to satisfy maybe your regulator with doing annual, biannual pen tests. But I think if you actually, and that's then my second point, if you actually want to have some kind of assurance or reassurance for yourself and also for your internal stakeholders and also external stakeholders, you need to invest into some kind of security validation, and automated security validation, I think is the obvious way to go for here. If you want to cover at least a big amount or a large enough of a scope that it actually matters. Yeah. Because you invest terabytes of data on a daily basis. You have, I don't know how many threat intel feeds you might ingest. You have new threat vectors, new IOCs that pop up on a daily basis, like thousands of them. How else are you going to keep up with that if not in an automated fashion? Mm-hmm. And also the assurance then comes into play with, you have your own detection rules. You have your own implementation, your own intelligence behind all of the systems that you have in place. And how can you assure yourself and your internal customers that this service that might even be untested in the real world, how this actually provides value internally, how this provides security, how this provides detection capabilities if you've not gone up against the real thing. Yeah?
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And I want to ask you, maybe go a little deeper on the difference between security control validation versus automated penetration testing. How would you describe those two different approaches? And, are they considered the same, or do you see them as different?
I think they're quite different in terms of scope and also how they are being performed. So with control validation, as an example, how we do it in RBI, specifically with Simulate, is we have our own detection searches that some of those are self-developed, some of those are not self-developed because you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. For me, control validation is more kind of with DevOps, it's actually testing what you have developed, whether the detection searches that you have developed detect what they are aiming to detect, what they are supposed to detect, or whether they actually need some kind of fine-tuning, or if they actually make sense how they are right now. Whereas pen testing, whether it's automated or not automated, for me is more you're trying to identify the gaps where you currently have no security control maybe in place that you can then put in place, whether that's detective or preventive capabilities. So for me, the main difference is with validation, you are actually trying to test what is there. With penetration tests, you're actually trying to find what is not there, where you do not have coverage right now.
That's a great perspective. I like that a lot. It's nice and easy and clean to understand. Okay, so I'll turn to you, Rafael. The idea of being proactive, right? We talked about it earlier. keeping one eye on the threats and trying to make sure your controls, your infrastructure is ready for that next threat. But it happens throughout the year when you see a headline, there's new threat intel of, hey, there's something new and urgent now. What are your strategies and tools to help answer that question of, are we exposed? And if we are, what do we do about it?
Okay. I use like a threat protection tool, which is a feed that keep me updated from new threats, and also is integrated with my vulnerability management platform. So it says to me if my assets are vulnerable and helps me to patch with the same agent that identified the vulnerability in my asset. So I can patch if I have a vulnerable asset, I can patch it in a fast way. So I also use continuous monitoring and proactive assessment. So your platform, guys, Simulate helps me with the assessments because it identifies weakness and helps me to test if we are really vulnerable or it's a false positive. So many times we have vulnerabilities in the assets, but it's not really vulnerable. We have a lot of false positives. So with the integration of my current platform with Simulate, I can test if asset is really vulnerable to some issue. So security tools are being effective to contain the threats, and I can use Simulate to test if it's true.
Yeah, thank you. That's awesome. I think we've all experienced that urge, that pressure of having a quick answer of are we exposed? And I think you've got the right processes and technologies to aid you with that. So I'll switch a little bit, going back to Marcus and your intro. You talked about experience with cloud. And so, obviously that's had a big shift for SecOps in terms of both visibility as well as the controls. What's been your own experience there, and any advice you would share for best practices around, again, cloud's visibility and control?
I think in terms of best practices or recommendations, in a lot of security applications, I would say it's do not try to reinvent the wheel, just use what is there, because cloud environments, especially things like Microsoft, whether that's Azure or the software as a service side with Office 365, Defender, they offer a lot of capabilities out of the box. You just need to actually invest the time to understand how to best apply them or apply them in your environment. But I think that is one of the big benefits of the entire shift to cloud, that you get more control, you get more visibility than, at least for us, compared to when you previously bought actual hardware from a service provider that is somewhere within your region, within your country, because you get a lot of tools on top of the offering that's just the bare metal offering that you can then actually run on top of that give you insight into what is running on specific containers, what kind of vulnerabilities are on certain machines, how can you mitigate those vulnerabilities, what kind of risks do they pose, can they actually be exploited or are they not exploitable? And obviously there's also a plethora of tools that you can, like third-party tools that can be stacked on top of AWS or Azure. And I know that you also, at least for exposure management, also offer something in that regard. But I think another, obviously also again, big benefit or shift for cloud is again automation, efficiency, because with services like Azure and AWS, you can build a lot of things that then run in a very automated setup, which is, and I think also for us in RBI, it's not just SecOps that is important in this regard. It is actually DevSecOps, because we also build so we are using Splunk, and our Splunk platform, the entire infrastructure, is running as code and can be redeployed at any point in time in a different region, in a different availability zone. If one ability zone goes down, obviously another is immediately spun up. But also our let's say, security analysts, me included, also our detection searches are written as code, which is then stored in GitHub and automatically pushed to staging environments, productive environments, to assess what is the impact. So I think also for us, in terms of developing our security capabilities, it has very much changed a lot in terms of what we can do and how we can achieve it as well.
Yeah, it makes sense. And while cloud and hybrid environments are not new, but are continuing to evolve and are growing, another thing that seems to be growing and getting bigger would be the compliance requirements, right? If you've always had some PCI's had a requirement for pen testing. You've seen other compliance requirements requiring some ongoing assurance. Sometimes they don't always say continuous testing, but the ongoing assurance is oftentimes what they're looking for. Raphael, what's been your experience with the role of the compliance trends toward more ongoing assurance and how automation can help with that?
Perfect. The security assessment tools help us a lot with this. I use these tools to create a risk appetite score that I measure monthly and report to the audit and risk team, and also to our controller, or my best controller. So I can test the efficiency of every single tool that I have, like DLP, antivirals, EGR, proxy. And so these automations helps us a lot, because Marcus said before, we cannot use our red team to test every single control that we have in our companies, because it spends a lot of time to test every single mode the same thing. So it's a intelligent way to prevent these kind of tasks and manual tasks, is to use a tool like Simulate to conduct these automated assessments. So with platforms like that, we can schedule monthly tests to validate our defenses. For example, the file extensions that are allowed as attachments on emails, and other features like DLP and EDR, like I mentioned before. So for us, it's a game changer.
Yeah, thank you. So we opened the webinar with this path to exposure management. And, Gartner introduced the term of continuous threat exposure management probably about 2 years ago. It kind of means something different to everybody, right? Is exposure management just a new form of vulnerability management? Obviously, SecOps is much more than vulnerability management. So I'd ask for you in your own words, what does exposure management mean for you, and how are SecOps? What's the role of SecOps in pushing this effort forward? Marcus, why don't you start us off?
I think our primary role in exposure management is creating awareness around it to a large degree. And it also goes back to talking, let's say, with your internal products that you might have, that they are also aware of. I mean, some products are not aware what risks come when you actually expose services to the internet. Some product teams might know that, they should know that, but maybe not all are aware of all of the risks that are associated with that. So I think a lot of it is about creating awareness. But when it comes to what exposure management actually is, I think it can be a lot of things, and as you mentioned, Brian, a lot of things understand different parts as part of exposure management. But I think it starts with something as basic as asset management, because if you don't know what exists in your environment and what can be exposed in your environment, you don't know where you should actually focus your exposure management lens. Yeah? And beyond that, or I think that is actually the first step, and that is already a very hard step. As the larger your environment grows, the harder it is to actually have a proper asset management to know what is running in your environment. And if you actually have a decent or a good asset management, then you can actually build on top of that. And then I think we get to a lot of basic security hygiene topics like vulnerability identification, vulnerability scanning, vulnerability management. But again, that is also tied into creating risk awareness with the people that are actually responsible for the services that have these vulnerabilities. And then also making them aware that they are responsible for these vulnerabilities and for the patching of these vulnerabilities. So I think for us, it is very much about creating awareness, but not just about creating awareness, but then also creating understanding how to mitigate things. Because, and here I'm coming back to what I think our role as SecOps in general is. It's not just telling people these are your responsibilities, these are our requirements, these are the standards, just follow them and do it. It's also about actually helping and supporting your internal stakeholders with moving towards that goal, with moving towards these mitigation measures that they can be put in place, and not just telling them to do it. And afterwards, the next thing that I think ties into exposure management is obviously you get a lot of data from various threat intelligence feeds, from internal, external attack surface scans. You ingest, I don't know, depending on your environment, you ingest terabytes of data. And all of that you need to somehow filter and then consider, okay, where do I apply what specific measures in terms of the layers that are actually exposed either directly to the internet. So you have to have a very, very strong focus and first of all, understanding of where you should focus on, and then actually focus on where it matters the most, where you have the biggest exposure or the biggest attack surface that can actually be grabbed, attacked by specific threat actors then at the end of the day.
Yeah, it makes sense. Thank you. Rafael, what about for you? What does exposure management mean for you, and what's the role of SecOps with exposure management?
Yeah, again, I totally agree with Marcos. It's a nice answer. So, but an interesting thing he mentioned that is risk management. For me, it's definitely risk management. So we need to decide how much risk we want to accept and how much risk we are going to mitigate or to eliminate. So I also think that this decision needs to be taken by the board of directors. So for me, our role as a security team is to maintain the risks aware to the board of directors, and so they decide what risks they are going to accept and what risks we are going to eliminate or to mitigate. And for me, it also helps when we bring financial impact to the risks being exploited. So cybersecurity team is a difficult thing to understand for the board of directors. So we are a lot of technical skills. We have a lot of technical skills. So when we talk about financial impact and money, for me, it helps a lot to make the board understand the cybersecurity risks.
All right, thank you. So I think we have time for one last question. And you both have great experience with automating security validation. What would be your guidance for another SecOps engineer, a program that's getting started looking at automation and automated security validation? What's your guidance for how to be successful and make sure that investment provides the biggest benefit for security operations? So Marcus, why don't you start for us?
I would say in general, start small and scale later. Mm-hmm. So maybe you have a specific use case in mind. Maybe you have someone is building a new golden image in a cloud environment for your EC2 instances, for example, that you want to test, that you want to validate. Is this actually properly hardened? Can we actually use this? Is this compliant with our internal standards, with the regulatory requirements we face? So maybe you have a specific use case, but in general, I would say start small and build something like a minimum viable product where you say, this is specifically what I want to assess, and validate the security of, and then based on that also set up all the surrounding processes, all the surrounding responsibilities, and basically figure out what you're going to do with the results of the security validation.
Yeah,
And
I like that.
How they are. Want to go ahead? Yeah.
I would say that make sure, like, hey, when you have the results, they don't just go into the backlog of all your other vulnerabilities, right?
Exactly.
You have a plan to take action on them, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's usually better to essentially start small and figure out all the surrounding stuff, all the surrounding details. Because otherwise, if you immediately start with rolling out at scale, you will have a lot of findings, you will have a lot of results. And if you then ship this internally to your stakeholders, to your product teams, they will immediately be overloaded, and it will be another thing on top of vulnerability management, on top of threat modeling, on top of security architecture that they have to take care of. And if you then arrive with thousands of new findings at the same time, they will tell you, yeah, I'm not going to say it right now, but the answer probably won't be nice, or they will simply ignore the results that you provide them, even though they are valuable. But if you start small and actually figure out, how does this fit into our organization? How can it be integrated into existing processes? How can the findings actually provide value and be used in my day-to-day operations? And then after all of this has been set up, you actually scale out and deploy it on additional services, additional operating systems, deploy additional automated tests. Then all of that is already solved, and I think you will have a way better experience than if you start with everything at once.
Makes sense. All right. So, Raphael, for you, what would be your guidance? Any tips, success, things you've had success with to make sure that an automated security validation, a BAS project has the benefits you expect?
Okay. For me, I think when evaluating this kind of tool, these security assessments, automated security assessment tools, we need to focus on three main points. First, the goals. So why am I hiding this tool, or what's the reason that makes me to evaluate an automated tool? So it's to improve detection coverage or to reduce incident response time. So the main reason is important here to choose the right tool. Another thing for me is integration. So does these tools integrate with my existing tools? So the other tools that I have, like for vulnerability management, EGR, to my CM. So does these tools that I am hiding can integrate with my actual tools? And the other thing is scalability that you said before, the emergent threats. So the tool that I am choosing, that I am hiding, can say to me if I am vulnerable to the emergent threats. It's received automatic updates, and it's updated daily or weekly. So it's important for me. These three main points are important to define and evaluate a security tool.
That's awesome. Okay. So Marcus, Raphael, thank you very much for this. I always learn so much when we have these conversations, and you definitely added so much. For anyone interested in learning more, there's, Marcus has actually a case study that's published that we'll have in the links here in the comments, and will be in the follow-up. There's a practical guide to exposure management, and a lot more information on just automated security control validation you can find on the Simulate website. So with that, I just want to say, thank you to Marcus, thank you to Raphael for sharing your knowledge and your insights and your experiences. And for anyone who's attended, if you have questions and follow up, obviously we'll reach out, and you'll see some emails and follow communication from Simulate that allows you to engage if you're interested. So, hey, thank you to you both. I hope everybody has a great day, and I know I learned something. Hope you all did too.
Thank you, Brian,
for having us,
for the opportunity, and thank you, Marcus, for the partnership.
Thank you as well. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.